The Avengers was really one of the few books of that period that kind of kept its classic setup and classic milieu all through that period. In some ways, more so than even in the 60s, where Stan very early on wrote out Thor and Iron Man and Captain America and brought in more second-string characters to kind of carry the line. That was a period where a lot of the Marvel strips, were kind of, for lack of a better term, they were retrenching.
Every fan always imagines their favorite characters meeting the other characters. So when the Avengers first came out and seeing them all together with the Hulk and Giant Man and the Wasp, you felt like you were getting more bang for your buck because they were all there.
The classic Hallmark Avengers period kind of goes up to around about issue 200. And so I was coming in, somewhere in the 160s. So it was very prime real estate to kind of enter the book and enter the series. It was really at a classic high. Once Stan juggled the team in issue 16 and brought in Hawkeye and Quicksilver and the Scarlet Witch, it became much more of what we consider a traditional, typical Marvel comic, where it was more about the personalities of the characters and how they interacted, more so than the thread of the week. Because it was 1963 and personalities and characterization was sort of a new thing, a new trend in comics, they didn't really get into it as deeply as we would today. Iron Man, the technologist and the futurist and the rationalist, would have no common ground with Thor, the eternal, long-lived Viking warrior god.
When I first took on the Avengers, actually I had two separate and distinct runs on the Avengers. The first time was in about 1974, when I first started in the industry. I came in as one of the few artists who was volunteering to do the Avengers. So it wasn't a book that they were assigning to me, it was a book I was actively asking to do. As much as any arrogant kid who's only been in the business 1.5 years could do. Your sense of grandeur is a little overinflated, but it's that ego that helps, fuel a lot of artists to take on assignments that others may not think them right for. So I love the idea of drawing all the characters, and that's why I wasn't confined to one. The regular artists on the series had gone on vacation for a month. The production manager over at Marvel Comics called me up and asked me if I was willing to do a fill-in issue. So when George Tuska went on vacation for what was supposed to be only a month, I snapped it, did my best work. The writer, everyone involved saw this guy, George, is very rough, but he definitely enjoys what he's doing. And the writer credited me with adding little things and nuances that showed that I was a storyteller beyond just being an artist following the paces of a story, that I was adding little flourishes. And he wanted that for the book. If I wanted to stay working in the industry, I had to prove myself valuable to them. And what better way to be valuable than to be a popular artist on a book that nobody else wanted and that I love doing. So it made me become a better artist because I realized this is the industry I wanted to be in. They say that enthusiasm was rather infectious. They saw somebody who really, truly enjoyed drawing the Avengers. I loved Captain America, Thor, the Scarlet Witch, the Vision. Anybody who I can put in, I wanted in there. Whenever a writer asks me what characters do I want to be featured in an issue, I say pretty much everyone you can think of. So if I wanted to be in it for the long haul, as I am now celebrating 31 years, I had to improve as an artist, and the Avengers was an enormously bright spotlight to show my works. When I worked in the 1970s, that was the first volume of the Avengers, which lasted well into the hundreds of issues. Then it was canceled for a reboot called Heroes Reborn, which lasted only about a little over a year. And then they decided they wanted to go back to the original Avengers, as they were with the original history. And that became Avengers Volume 3, which is the one I did with Kurt Busiek. Having the advantage of working from issue 1 to my last issue, issue 34, with some fill-ins in between, but I did also a lot of double issues in between. It gave me a run that was distinctly mine. There hasn't been a single artist in Volume 3 who lasted as long as I did on that series. So definitely it became the Busiek-Perez Avengers.
George was the first guy attached to Avengers. I believe that Bob Harris, who was an editor-in-chief, and Ralph Macchio called George up at a certain point and offered him Avengers, and even to both write and pencil the book. And George said, I don't think I can write it. I've been out of touch with the Marvel characters for too long. I haven't been reading the books, and you're not going to be able to do a good job if you don't know what's going on. But I'd love to draw it, and I'd like maybe one of two guys to write it.
I became the writer of the Avengers after Marvel brought them back into the regular continuity and the regular universe. I was the first name on the list, and they offered it to me, and I just ain't stupid enough to say no.
Kurt came on board. He wrote up a little outline of what we'd be doing, and George got involved, and we bounced ideas around.
My goals for the Avengers starting out were I wanted to reestablish what was so great about them. The people who were working on it were trying to make it more like other popular books, more like the X-Men, more like whatever was selling, and I thought that was kind of a mistake. They were chasing trends rather than setting them.
So that was really the intent with Avengers, is to do, it's a superhero book, it's unashamedly a superhero book.
The big, bold, sun-drenched daytime heroes that stand on the wall to protect us all while we sleep.
Just kind of go whole hog on giving readers the most action, the most adventure, the most soap opera character development that we could manage into 22 pages every month.
I wasn't a comics fan growing up, at least not until I was 14 years old, because my parents didn't allow them in the house. So I'd only read them here and there at, barbershops or friends' houses or so forth. But once I started reading comics regularly when I was 14, I latched onto the Avengers pretty quickly, and it was during a very, very good run of the book. And so they became favorites of mine pretty fast.
Kurt and I were both looking towards, doing an old-fashioned comic where story was just as strong as graphic. Kurt, being a writer, of course, firmly believed that, first and foremost, we're both storytellers. We have to tell a story.
George is a brilliant storyteller. He is a gregarious, engaging, enthusiastic guy. He's always up for a challenge.
Kurt and I developed a very good, strong friendship and a working relationship where he trusted me. Unlike when I first went on the Avengers, where I was the unknown commodity, I was the known commodity. Kurt was coming in knowing, okay, he's got George Perez. He knows that basically George will do anything, and there are certain things that George likes to do.
George's favorite word is more. How many characters should we have in this? How many villains should we show? I remember there was one time I gave him a splash page to draw, a full page spread that had 85 villains on it. It was, let's see, a survey of the Avengers' greatest villains in the past. And I listed 85 villains he could draw and put in a note saying, well, you don't have to draw all of them. He threw in another 25 just for fun.
I wanted a book that can be reread and rewatched and find something new. And Kurt provided that in his writing. He often would put clues to upcoming storylines. One of the things in working with Kurt is that I had been away from the Avengers for so long that I really relied on Kurt to do much more of the story and the plotting. So I trusted him to come up with ideas and sometimes did not know exactly where he was going.
George did used to say that when we got when he'd get a plot in from me, the plot would be this thick, and the reference stack of Xeroxes would be this thick, because I'd be referring to so many other issues or other characters or so forth or so on.
My job was to take what he gave me and add the flourishes. And if I were going to do any changes, it was usually in just how to get to the same point in his story in a different road. I mean, again, like choreographing a fight or realizing, well, he's written about these characters, but hasn't explained what this character is doing in that scene, and I will add that in, always at the service of the story. If I'm going to make any changes which affects the story, and I think, this might work better, I would always call him first. I always do that with every writer.
He thrives with a huge cast. He's terrific at drawing any number of environments from, if you ask him on page 6 to show a bunch of heroes fighting in the depths of hell, and then the next scene is set on a space station, and the next scene is set in the heart of the sun, and the next scene is set at a fancy restaurant in Manhattan, all of it will be dramatic, all of it will be believable, all of it will look cool.
By the time I came back to the Avengers in the 1990s, I had not been doing the book for well over a decade, so I was very, very rusty. Here, Kurt knew the characters. He could take what's already been established, dig into the history, and then throw a new spin on it. He was great at throwing fastballs at me and curves.
I've said many times that when I turned in my first plot for the Avengers, it was a Kurt Busiek story. And when I got the first pages back from George, all of a sudden it was an Avengers story. because George had just made it look like it ought to. You know, he'd made it look big and dramatic and over the top and amazing in the way that only he can do it.
If he said the characters are walking through a door, I would have an entire sequence showing retina scans, and then there was one page that he particularly liked where he described that they walk into this computer monitoring room, some kind of a government security agency with computers and surveillance and everything else. And instead of showing a straight-on shot of the characters coming into the room, the Avengers coming into the room, I went straight into a down shot and made it multi-layer in rings so that you see a bank of people on the upper level looking down. There's another level under them, another level under them, and the Avengers, the smallest things on the page, coming into the room. So it's something Kurt was not expecting.
The whole time I was working with him, it was wonderful to see him telling my stories, but telling them in his way, and that just enhanced them in a way that made the book twice as loud as it was when I was done with it.
My greatest compliment from any writer is when they say, "I am nuts." Of course, that took me a lot longer to design in addition to execute. That's what makes it so much fun. When the characters are fighting, now most writers will not choreograph the fight for me. They will not say this person does this person does that. They may say who wins, they may make a suggestion. They leave the choreography to me. I become the person who handles the way we get from point A to point B in the action. And sometimes it zigzags back and forth.
George has always been the kind of artist who knows that every month there are new readers coming into the industry, and he's got to capture their attention without them knowing that he's a big star from, you know, for the past X number of years.
If you're doing your job right, then you're directing or choreographing a silent film wherein so much of the action is shown in the graphics that the writer basically all he has to do is minimal title cards to give motivation, to give exposition. If the writer has to explain what I've just drawn, then I haven't done my job.
In restarting the Avengers the way we were doing it, we wanted to go with the classic members, with the absolute best known. Thor, Iron Man, and Captain America are kind of the nucleus of the team, and we knew we wanted them right from the start. There are other characters associated with the Avengers, the Vision, the Scarlet Witch, Hawkeye, and we wanted enough of them to make it feel like, you know, there was a lot of texture going on. There was a nice team setting there. Plus bringing back characters like Wonder Man and turning Ms. Marvel into Warbird so that we could use her in the team.
One of the biggest challenges in Avengers is the fact that you have these characters who basically cannot age, like in any comic, to any great degree. Captain America has the great advantage is that he was frozen in time after towards the end of the Second World War. Of course, when he came back to modern time, when he was thought out, has changed. First, of course, he came out in the 60s and in the 70s, because otherwise he would have to age, if we state specifically what year he was in. Thor's a god. He didn't have to worry.
We did a number of controversial things. Probably the most controversial was bringing Wonder Man back from the dead and starting a romance between him and the Scarlet Witch, something that had been kind of a romantic triangle in the past with the Scarlet Witch, the Vision, and Wonder Man, but it had never played out that way before. We also had a new design for Wonder Man in which the ionic energy that powered him kind of bled off him at the outlines and made him look like a crackly energy guy rather than a solid human guy.
There are so many different types of characters, so many variations on mankind, that allows a lot of writers to do different things. Thor is a god. I mean, so you look at him sometimes from the outsider. The Vision is an android. So you were dealing with a character who's just getting in touch with emotions he never even knew he had. Here are the top drawer characters, all teamed up in one book. The challenge in the Avengers is, of course, making an adventure for the Avengers something that is worthy of that kind of big league assemblage.
Well, with Earth's Mightiest Heroes, some of that was a case of we were doing Avengers Disassembled in the main title, in which we were basically going to be tearing apart the classic Avengers and recomposing them in a new way as the new Avengers. And as sort of a counterpoint to that, because we knew there'd be plenty of people that would be upset at that and outraged and so forth. And there would be a need and a desire for sort of classic Avengers material. Joe Casey and I had been talking about doing some kind of classic Avengers book. You know, he'd been a big Avengers fan and has wanted to write the Avengers for years and years and years. And I'd always had this idea in the back of my head for doing sort of like an Avengers year one kind of a treatment. The story of Earth's Mightiest Heroes, you know, at its most basic was about showing how these characters interact, showing how the introduction of Captain America as an element into that mix, even though he wasn't there for when the team was initially formed, was really the catalyzing element that allowed the Avengers to become a stable organization and something that would grow into sort of a legend over the course of many years. And really to kind of paint in the sequences between the early stories that we'd already seen, focusing more on characterization, and certainly with the hindsight of knowing what was going to happen to all these characters over the next 20 or 30 years. And also, you know, because we were doing it in 2003, 2004, you know, evoke a modern sensibility. That the conceit of the Marvel Universe is that really these superheroes have only been around for maybe 10 years, give or take, because Captain America clearly is not a 55-year-old man and didn't come out of the ice in 1965. If it was 10 years ago, he comes out of the ice during the Bill Clinton presidency. And so you get to sort of you know, revisit the classic Captain America staple of the man out of time, but now it's a man out of time that's a man out of time in our time, and how that kind of relates and affects. And that can be a little more connective with an audience today, while still giving you all the classic stylings of Iron Man and his big bulky yellow armor and all the classic costumes and the broad strokes of those big conflicts of the early books.
Avengers was sort of maintaining a status quo. It was really sort of one of those tried and true titles that, you know, was sort of, you know, still being written and drawn in the traditional sort of Marvel fashion. It was giving that segment of our Marvel readership exactly what they wanted out of the Avengers. You know, there's a traditional way that book sort of ran. But there was also a part of me that felt, you know what, this book can be so much more if we're willing to just shake it up a little bit, you know. And by the way, this is in no way a knock on the folks that were doing the book before we shook it up. That's just what the book has always been. It was pretty risky to sort of change things, but so far it's really, really worked. It's actually turned the Avengers franchise into a franchise that is on a par, if not actually exceeding right now, our X-Men franchise. That's a huge accomplishment.
Every, twice or three times a year, we have a creator retreat, where basically our editorial staff and 3 or 4 of our key creators get together in a room and talk about the next year's worth of books and what ideas we have for characters and where we're going to go with storylines and plot out the big beats.
What happens is, though, again, when tradition sets in, you know, people start to view it as like, well, you know, it is those characters, those were the original Avengers, and there's no reason why any, you know, all these other characters should be in here. But the truth of the matter is now, you know, looking at Marvel year 2005, when you look at what our top characters are today versus what they were in 1962 or 63, it's significantly different. Sure, some have remained the same, but it is significantly different. And I'll never forget the meeting where it all sort of came to a head. It was one of our creative meetings, and I was sitting next to Mark Millar and Bryan at the time, and Mark was recounting how, you know, being Scottish, he was always looking for a bargain as a kid.
There was just something I always liked about them. I think they just seemed like, you know, all the coolest guys all in one team. And as a typical Scot, I liked the idea of getting all these characters that maybe cost, you know, £1 each in their own comics, getting them all for £1 in one book. It was a cheap way of getting to read all their adventures, and I loved the idea of that. You know, just when you picked up one of those comics, everybody you liked was in the one book.
So we sat there and we're like, well, yeah, I mean, if we want to make Avengers the #1 book, which it should be, it's Earth's Mightiest Heroes, okay? And in which case, then why can't Wolverine be in it? I mean, Wolverine is arguably one of the biggest movie stars in the world right now. Why can't Spider-Man be in it? And, you know, the traditionalists in us started to raise our hands and say, well, you know, Peter Parker can't be an Avenger because of X, Y, and Z. But what if he was? What kind of fun stories can we tell? You know, I mean, Peter's a loner. Yeah, I know, but what happens with a loner when you throw him into a group of superheroes? You know, what sort of fireworks ensue? And we started playing that game, the Wouldn't It Be Cool game, and before you know it, we had great stories that were just happening there at this conference. And we realized, you know, it is possible. And then, like with everything in comics, you know, we released the news, and the internet fans loathed it and hated it and said it would never work. And lo and behold, we have the #1 book in the industry.
I think New Avengers, you know, it's a book that's certainly more in Bryan's wheelhouse. in that whatever ties it's cut with the classic Avengers and the classic Avengers style, it allows Bryan to play more to his strengths rather than the expectations.
Bryan started to come up with the idea for Disassembled in order to sort of get the ball moving, not just for the new Avengers, but also for House of M, which was, again, very important to us.
At the end of Avengers Disassemble, what we discover is that the Scarlet Witch, who has always sort of been a mainstay of the Avengers team, really because of the nature of her powers and the magics that she taps into, is really not playing with a full deck. And she's been progressively getting worse and worse and worse under everybody's nose for years, to the point where she is inadvertently and sort of accidentally responsible for destroying the classic Avengers team.
It's a mystery book, but it's also launched a number of other really great titles, Young Avengers being one of them. We've able to relaunch a reinvigorated Captain America book. It's really helped out all the characters that are sort of involved there. Not only that, Spider-Woman is like a major player in the Marvel Universe now. I mean, we're actually going to launch a Spider-Woman title. Who'd have thunk, it's really been very, very helpful in a number of different areas by revitalizing the Avengers, revitalizing the core Marvel Universe.
It's always easier to reinvent the wheel than to invent the wheel, and it's the same sort of thing, with the Ultimates. The Ultimates is a brilliant book, but by the same token, it's a brilliant book that has a brilliant book as its foundation, as its basis.
There was something very real life about them in the period that I was reading them. Like in the UK, we got reprints of the books that guys had read maybe 5 years before in the US. So I was reading the John Buscema, Roy Thomas periods as a little kid, and I loved that. The idea of superheroes sitting around the kitchen having coffee and so on, and sitting watching television and going to each other's stag do's and weddings and so on. It just all seemed very real, and you didn't really get that stuff at other companies and sometimes even in other books.
After 3 decades and change, I still love what I do. I have had offers in animation, I've had offers in advertising, and even storyboarding film. I love drawing comics. This is what I do. My goal is to be like Norman Rockwell, who had an unfinished picture on his drawing board. I want to have an unfinished picture on my drawing board. I just don't want it to be the one that I'm drawing now. My mom and my wife are the 2 really important people in my life. And I know that they're proud of the artist I became. I want my mom and my wife to always be proud of the man that I am.
It's always good to leave the stage while people are still paying attention and not wait until you're completely tapped out and dry and they're going, will somebody bring on somebody else? For God's sake.
Wait, did you say Hawkeye died? This interview's over. I'm out of here. I'm sorry. I got it.